And it looks like Emmy is just going to stare at me from the open door now that I opened it up for her, since she was whining and wanted to go outside of the closet. And now she's just going to look back at me and just be like, why'd you let me out? Why aren't you coming out too?
It would be nice to have a little peek inside their minds, just to get a little better feeling for their thought process.
Yeah, but it would also
a little easier to understand.
It would also be quite scary, I think, depending on the dog.
Yes,
it's like, but
that's true.
I would love to see the difference between Emmy and my parents' dog Lucy, because Lucy doesn't seem to have a singular thought between her eyes at all at any point. Whereas Emmy always seems to be scheming something, always seems to have something going on in there. What it is, we aren't quite sure, but I would love to know. But yeah, it would be interesting, to say the least.
And as we were chatting just before we started recording, my dog Oliver, he's an interesting dog. He really wants to be part of the pack, so he tries really hard to be part of the pack. And he has a bit of terrier in him. So we have some rats that are in the backyard, and we also have all sorts of predators in terms of hawks and coyotes and stuff like that. So there's absolutely no way I will use poison on the rats, because that just hurts all the animals higher up in the chain. But he did manage to catch a baby rat, and he just had it like it was on the lawn. It like jumped towards him. He grabbed it, shook it, and mostly did it in. But then I had to put the little thing out of its misery, so I grabbed the flip flop and whacked it a few times, and then he was just, backed into the corner, like just staring at me like, what have you done? How dare you, So it is strange that they have this thought process going on. Whereas, I'm like, hey, I'm just finishing what you started, Oliver. This is nature.
But I wonder too, with that specifically, because Emmy has a major prey drive too. And again, like we were saying before, like she wants to protect our yard from birds, from deer, from anything that's in the yard. She wants to protect it. It's her yard. Nobody else has business being in it except for her humans. And like the other night, she was introduced to fireflies for the first time, and she did not like the fact that they were flying in her yard. But
interesting.
I think it's funny though too, because we'll see her with like bugs especially, where it almost looks like she's just trying to play with them. Like she's pawing at them. She's like nudging them with her nose, like trying to play in a sense. Yeah. And then when they're dead, she gets sad because she's like, they stop moving, and she's like, oh, like friend. So I kind of wonder if they, at least for the most part, because they're so far away from wolves, at least especially some of these breeds are. Yeah. I kind of wonder if they just think that everything should be their friend and everything wants to play with them. And when something happens where they stop moving, they stop playing, they get upset with it. And then like Oliver seeing you be a flip-flop killer and murder his friend that was just taking a rest. I kind of wonder that, like, again, what goes on in their heads.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. But in other news, I've completed work on all the videos from my spring trip, and I did the same thing for this series where I leaned heavily on the journal entries.
Okay,
and it worked out really well, because I find that if I'm sitting there, writing the journal in the field, I'm very much in the present. I like to describe things around me. I think, at least if I'm reading a book, one of the things I love most is when the author is very descriptive about the surroundings. It just paints that mental image, and it puts you right in that place. And what I found is that by me taking the time to write the journal entry and just describe my surroundings, when I, read back selections from the journal as voiceover for the videos, I think it really adds to the experience in the way that it would if you're reading a book that has that. So that new formula I've been using with the written journals, I think is something I'm going to stick with long term, just because it does add that extra bit of staying in the moment. But I didn't shoot a lot of photos on this trip. So on the backpacking trip, I had 8 sheets of film with me. I exposed 7 of those 8 sheets of film on 7 different subjects. And then when I got back, I scanned the images in, and then I rescanned a few of them because I found that I could just do a little bit better with the scan, the settings for the scanner. But it was weird because now I'm at the stage where I have the images I really like from the spring trip, the images I really like from the winter trip. And during the summer is when I start work on figuring out what I'm going to do for this year's print portfolio. And I need to make the selection. I like to have 10 images by the end of the year. I usually have, 7 to 8 that I'm pretty happy with at this point, and then leave, another 2 or 3 slots for when I come back from my fall trip. But at this point, I have 10 images I'm very happy with. And it's strange because, and this will be a very strange thing. I know this will sound very strange, but I think I've taken too many photos. It sounds absurd because I took a total of 7 photos on the spring trip. But I mean, I have 10 images already for the year that I'm happy with, that I'm going to have to start making some decisions. But also in the back of my mind, when you have more of something, you appreciate each of those things a little bit less. So it's a strange relationship between, I feel like I need to shoot less, which is weird. So I'm curious what, how that has transpired now that more time has passed since you got back from your trip, and the work that you gathered from that. How was the experience with working with the digital, and now that you've had a little bit more time to sit on the images, do you have any thoughts on any of that?
So I don't remember if I mentioned how many photographs I took over the course of this trip, but it ended up being over 200 images that I had taken.
That's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Which it's more than I have taken in probably 4 years of working with 4x5. So it's certainly a different way of thinking about things. And a lot of that came down to, I was really almost in a state of, I don't want to call it a true state of flow because it wasn't, but I was just really into the Americana photography that I was doing. I ended up with 125 photographs for that such series, and then about 75 or so just of general Palouse photography, more of abstracts and that kind of deal. And those numbers are coming from after I went through and got rid of all of any duplicates that I had, any photographs that just weren't good at all. And I can definitely relate to the idea of I need to photograph less.
Yeah.
Which of course, this is a kind of a unique circumstance because of the fact that it was a trip where it really could just be a once and done trip. Whether I go back to the Palouse is up in the air because obviously it's so fresh, but also because it's of the distance and it's not exactly my kind of photography for most of it. So that kind of gives me a sort of a loophole in the terms of, well, this is just a once and done 200 plus photographs taken because of because of the circumstances. I don't foresee myself, and in my day-to-day photography, I don't really do that much with taking a ton of photos like that. But nonetheless, it's been interesting to work through it and to try and figure out what I'm going to even do with these photographs, let alone getting them down to a reasonable number for gallery releases, or where there's not a lot of duplication, where they're all of quality. And what makes that more difficult is that, at least right now, especially with the Americana work, I really like a lot of it. And that's because I'm such a great photographer and everything, because I'm just world class at what I do. They're all perfect.
Master photographer.
Exactly. Yeah. They're all perfect. And there are no issues with any of them compositionally or otherwise. So that's what makes it really difficult too. It's just,
Well, one of the things that we've talked about in the past, which has certainly been a recurring theme, is the returning to a location and building a connection with that location, and through that connection, developing a stronger sense of work. Now, here you have a situation where this may perhaps be the only time you go there, so you don't have that connection. There's a lot of novelty to what you're seeing. Do you think that is, as a result of that, do you think that it will have an impact on how you continue to change your perception of the work that you captured, whether there's going to be some that, as the experience kind of fades away, I wonder how that perception will change, since it's not a place that you're necessarily going to be, returning to.
Yeah, I don't really know. Right now, my head is around this one collection of photographs that I had taken in a town called Garfield, and for Dodge and Burn, the second issue of it, I'm kind of focusing my article on these ideas of imperfection and such, trying to grapple with the ideas of it, because when I was there, I totally screwed up my focus for one reason or another. Despite working on a tripod, despite still trying to work slowly like I usually would, I was relying too much on what the LCD was telling me in terms of focus peaking, and not actually looking at what it was saying to me, but rather a quick glance, composition looked good. And so I don't think I really changed my focus much at all between shots because of what I was seeing. And I ended up being off. It's a menial amount. So the photographs still are okay, printed at 8x10, even at 16x20, like an 8x10 crop of 16x20 print. They look okay. They're still usable. But again, it's a question of, am I allowing these imperfections because of the fact that I may not be able to go back and retake these photographs?
Yeah.
Or am I allowing them because they truly are just menial imperfections that ultimately don't matter?
Do you think that because working with large format is very imperfect in many ways, and you learn, based on your experience of working with it, I'm sure it's similar to mine, where you learn that certain things just aren't possible, and you become more forgiving of issues like that, in a way that with digital, it's so easy to get everything, quote, technically right, that you're very unforgiving when things are not quite there.
Yeah.
Versus with large format, where it's kind of like, I did the best I can. It is what it is. I have one photo of this. I'm happy with it. I can see how maybe having worked with film in the past, you go into it thinking, not necessarily expecting perfection, but you also kind of wonder if that working with the digital now, you'll start falling into that trap a little bit more. So I can see how it can go either way.
So with this article, at the very head of it, I reference a quote by Ansel Adams that is, there's nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept.
Yeah.
And that's
a good one.
I kind of lean on that in a sense, because like you said, with large format, with film in general, film is filled with imperfections, whether it be the grain, whether it be slightly missed focus or scanning issues, development issues. There's so many ways that it can go slightly off and not be a fully perfect image. And yet they can still be images that have a deep emotional resonance, a deep impact in one way or another. I mean, I look at Michael Kenna did an entire book of photographs taken with his Holga, which is just a medium format plastic toy camera that you can buy for $50. It's plastic lens. It's not the sharpest thing. It's point and shoot. Like, there's really no way of getting a tack sharp image from it without manipulating it out of the box. And there are so many different issues in terms of light leaks and everything, even though you're buying it brand new. And I look at that kind of work too, and I just think, like, and even looking at some pinhole photographers, like pinhole photography, there's not a sharp part of that image most of the time.
Yeah, it's very, very dreamlike, very abstract in a way.
Exactly. And I have like there are 3 photographs from Garfield that I really do love. And they're the 3 photographs that are off, the focus is off, mainly behind the subject by just a hair. It's just enough to annoy the hell out of me. And it's like the one photograph is of an old, like 1980s, 1990s, maybe 70s Ford truck that is in front of the side of a barn. And then you have the nice darkened sky with a striped cloud going over it. And instead of the truck being in focus, it's like right behind the truck is in focus. And so it's not a huge deal. Again, printed out and everything. And from a typical viewing distance, you really can't even notice it. And as I wrote in this article, 9 viewers out of 10 probably won't even notice that it's not tack sharp. I have another photograph that is of 2 silos, kind of more intimate, more abstract in a sense. And it almost looks reminiscent of a pinhole photograph because of missing that focus. And again, just thinking like from a film mindset, if these were photographed with large format, I wouldn't have even known about this until maybe this week when I was developing them, or however long it took me until I scanned them in and everything. So yeah, I definitely do. It's a very long-winded way of saying I do think that large format kind of prepared me for acceptance of imperfections more than what digital photographers or native digital photographers would allow for. But I kind of want to keep that mindset going and not be worried so much about whether everything is like tack sharp. Like even the fact that I use adapted lenses. Like if I really cared about full on sharpness and best image quality and everything, I would be using Fuji's lenses. I'd really never use any kind of filters. I wouldn't use like teleconverters on long lenses because that all degrades, at least to a minimal degree, your image quality, and so therefore can introduce imperfections. So,
and here's another thing. Here's another angle to it. So imagine, the photo you mentioned of the truck up against with the background and everything, where it's focused a little bit behind the truck. Imagine that image printed, maybe 6 feet or so on the long side in a gallery situation, lit really nicely. If you're to walk in there and look at that image without any sort of other knowledge about it, do you think you would view that as, at that size, you'd certainly notice that focus is missed a little bit. Do you think you'd view that perhaps as a intentional decision by the artist, or do you think you'd say, oh, it's out of focus?
I kind of have 2 minds of that. Like when I look at these images and why I printed out an 8x10 crop of a 16x20 inch size was because I wanted to see if from a reasonable viewing distance, if it was really all that noticeable. And at that size, it really isn't. So I'm kind of the mind of if it's blown up so large, like 6 foot by whatever it would be, realistically, who's going to get so close or get close to it and still be really looking at it where they're not taking in the whole image? I think it's a lot more of a concern that other photographers viewing it would notice the imperfections to it. You know what I mean? would notice that it's not perfectly sharp. I could be wrong with that, but still, I don't know. I don't know that I care enough either.
Yeah. Do you, which leads to something else, which it's been a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. But when people talk about viewing distance, I always feel like it's excuses. Like when people say like, oh, if you look at this, 20-inch print up close, you're looking at it too close. It's not the proper viewing distance. You have to look at further away to take it in. But I also see that as saying, yeah, the picture is not all that good up close. It's not all that sharp. It's not all that great. So you have to view it further back so that it actually looks okay. I know it's a privileged perspective coming from large format. But even pictures taken from, let's say, like a 35 millimeter, when blown up very, very large in like a gallery situation, I love looking at them up close. And I think it's very forgivable in terms of, oh yeah, this is taken from 35 millimeter film. This is a 6-foot print. Yeah, it's not going to be tack sharp, but I think there's beauty at looking at the images up close. But what I think it does is I think it also reveals perhaps some like sloppiness and some editing and stuff like that. And I think maybe that's something that photographers don't necessarily want everyone to see. Maybe some bad cloning or some over sharpening or stuff like that. So I think it reveals those flaws that a lot of photographers don't want other people to see. So that's why they kind of hold on to the viewing distance thing. But man, I love getting close to a photo. I love looking at whether it's digital or film. I love, it's not a pixel peeping thing. It's just getting lost in an image. And for me, viewing it large and getting close to it is a really immersive part of that whole experience. But I realize that's coming from a different standpoint than most people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm of the school of thought that Nick Carver kind of talks about. And in a lot of his printing videos, he's always talking about viewing distance. And it's not so much that we all know that Nick knows what he's doing. Like, he knows his way around a camera, around film and all of that. But I don't know. I've just always subscribed to his ideologies around that the average viewer isn't going to be looking up close at your photographs, at your art, at any of that stuff. Like, I even think about looking up close to paintings and like, you're not going to see massive perfection in paintings either, just like you may not in a blown up image.
Emmy has something to talk about too.
Yeah. Between Emmy and my mom, it's just, nonstop interruptions. But anyway, trying to go back to my train of thought. I've always prescribed to what Nick Carver has said about viewing distance and that belief. And also there's the difference where at least from what you just said, it seems like you enjoy larger prints than what I do. Like, to me, the perfect print size will always be 8x10. Like, I love an 8x10 inch print. That's what all of my test prints, everything that I do is on that size. Because I've always loved Michael Kenna's presentation style of 8x8 in a 16x20 mat. I've liked smaller prints. So for me, the biggest that any of my work will ever be is 16x20, unless someone decides that they want to pay me a whole lot of money to have a photograph of a tree really large. So I think that makes a difference too.
But also when you consider that, like, I mean, by far, the most common print size I make is for the print portfolios. I don't make a lot of large prints. But I think, and you had mentioned, looking at a painting up close, and I think that goes along with my thoughts as well in terms of, I love looking at paintings up close because I think when you take a closer look, you have a greater appreciation for the craft involved in producing it. So, looking at a painting up close, you see the brushstrokes, you see the humanity behind it in terms of, this is the mark of the artist. You can see things from their perspective as they were creating it. And the same thing with a photograph. You have if you're to take a look at a Ansel Adams print let's say that's 8 by 10 inches versus a photo taken with an iPhone that's printed at 8 by 10 inches, in all reality, there's probably not going to be a huge difference between what is possible between, if a person's really good with an iPhone, they can produce something that's not far from what Ansel Adams would do. But as the scale increases, I think that's when you start having a greater appreciation for the craft. You see more nuance. And I think that's what it comes down to, because I was just thinking about, if I take one of the images that I print for my print portfolio, and those images are on 8 by 10 paper, but the image itself is 7.2 inches by 9.2 inches, and then there's a white border. But if I take that same image and I print it at a larger size, there's so much more nuance that you see in it. It's not a detail thing. It's just the subtlety and the tones and everything else, where the image just comes so much more alive. But again, I know it's coming from the standpoint of working with large format, where that's just the norm. But I just, I love getting lost in the detail and taking it in, because for me, ultimately, I want to look at a print and have the perception that I'm standing there and seeing it with my own eyes. And that's something where when a print does start falling apart, then you shatter that perception. But going back to the scenario of if I were to see, let's say the photo you had mentioned with the truck, and it's 6 feet wide, it's a big black and white print, it's displayed in a gallery, it's lit very nicely and everything, I would look at that and I would assume that the decisions that were made there were completely intentional and deliberate by the artist with a particular message in mind. And I think so much of that has to do with just the presentation. And when it's elevated to that level, you assume that everything you see is intentional, even if it's not. Yeah. So I think how it's being displayed is also a huge factor in how we perceive it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there. There's a lot of additional thoughts there around all of that, around imperfection and viewing distance, and a lot to sit and think with. But
yeah,
something else that's on my mind that harkens back to our initial talk, what sparked this of taking too many photographs, is kind of the thought that I have of how I plan on presenting these, especially.
Yeah. So what do you have in mind?
Well, part of me would love to do a zine, but another part of me really doesn't want to go through that process again, specifically with SmartPress. Not because they were bad, not because I had any negative... the hell's the word that I'm looking for? Not because I had any negative interactions with them or anything of the sort, but just because I wasn't 100% happy with how they turned out. And a lot of that is just my not understanding how to edit for such mediums as the papers that they were using, as the printers that they were using, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But I still, I look at what Nick Carver had just put out. He just did a zine for his Ana Luce series of photographs from his trip to Spain. And that's his second zine. And it's same format as the first one, beautifully printed. And I think about that, and I'm like, I think it would be awesome to have little booklets of photographs all centered around one project, one concept, that include an essay or maybe two essays in it. And they all look the same. They're all the same format on the bookshelf. They're all very cohesive, but obviously everything internally is changing. It's just a matter of, in order to do that, I would much rather find, just like Nick did, a local printer, a local print shop that I can work with one-on-one to really make sure that all the photographs are of a very high quality, that they shine in the way that I want them to. It's just a matter of figuring the logistics of that out. And so in the meantime, I'm kind of debating if I just want to do that as like a free portfolio book instead, and maybe without the essays in it, just do what everybody else is doing these days and present the photographs in a free portfolio ebook, because like I said, I don't know what else to do with them, because especially if I go from 125 to ideally less than 60, something like that, that's still a ton of photographs, and there's no way people are going to scroll through a gallery looking at them in the same way that they would be able to appreciate them as some sort of either physical or online book.
So when you put together the last zine, did you edit those on a laptop? Yeah. See, I think that's where the issue is coming from, unless you had an external monitor hooked to it.
No, I didn't. I want to get one, but yeah.
Yeah. See, from my experience, when I did the zine with SmartPress, the images are exactly as I expected them to be. And also when I did so I made as I mentioned earlier, the 10 test prints, for images that may possibly be used in my print portfolio. Every single one of them, after I made the print, I let it sit for a little bit just so everything dried. Then the first thing I do is I look at it in full sunlight, because that's where you'll see every flaw in it. You get a feeling for the color, the contrast, and everything. And again, it was exactly as I expected. And I've done zero calibration or anything. I'm using it's an Apple monitor, and I have a Mac Studio that it's hooked up to, but I just make sure that the brightness is about halfway and everything is spot on. I don't even have to jump down the hole of calibration stuff. But I just know from the past that working with a laptop, those screens, I know they've gotten way better, but they're not going to be as accurate as working with a desktop display.
Yeah, but
so my guess is that if you edit them on a good monitor and then use SmartPress, I think you'd be happy with the results. But like you said, if you find with a local print shop to work with, then they can kind of get you set up and you can go through the proofs and get everything the way you want it to be. But it is tricky with the rich dark tone that you like the images to have. It's a tough thing to print.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know that from, it's weird too, because, and I know that the printing process is different between something like what SmartPress is using versus like the Canon Pro 100 or whatever it is that I have at home. But it's always weird to me because the prints come out exactly how I want them to, based on how they look on the screen when I'm printing at home. So to not have them come out that similar way somewhere else is still an oddity to me, in a sense.
Yeah.
There's also the idea that I really just want to be hands-on with everything and have control.
Yeah.
And I hate when I don't. And to work with a local print shop gives me at least a modicum of control that I can at least be there and say, yes, no, let's do this, let's do that kind of thing. So I don't know. We'll see what actually happens. There are other things that I have on my plate right now that I am in the midst of working on with some other photographers and with my own personal stuff, but we'll see what happens in the future. It's still a few months out before I probably release anything from this Palouse trip, if we're being honest.
Yeah, I will say, though, that I really love the process of putting together the zine, the ebooks, the video stuff where you take all this stuff and you kind of funnel it into one particular project just to see how it unfolds. I kind of like that more than I like taking the pictures. I mean, it's a strange notion because people think like, oh yeah, you go off on these trips and you spend time out in nature, you take photos. I'm like, yes, it's great, but it's a lot of work. But it's more satisfying in a way, seeing how those photos become something else and how they take on a different life of their own when they're combined with text, or when I do the ebooks, the journal entries are combined with the photos I take. There's all these connections that I wasn't even very much aware of at the time, but you see these connections afterwards and things seem a lot more purposeful after the fact. When in the moment it was just kind of, it is what it is. Here's a picture of a tree. But then when you combine that with the thoughts, the day before, the day after, it really does take on a life of its own. So I think it would be really whatever you end up using those photos for, hopefully you also, enjoy that process of seeing it come together.
Yeah.
Because it really takes on a life of its own, which is, and that's something I think that not a lot of photographers get to experience that side of things. They experience taking photos, posting it on Instagram or wherever, but to see those photos take life in a project, whether it's a zine or an ebook or whatever it is, that I'll say that's one of the most rewarding parts of the entire process.
Yeah, that's why I love printing. Like, I love printing out some of my favorite photographs too, because it's not just the tangibility of it, but it feels like a finalized piece. And to me, the same thing goes when I'm doing layout for the magazine. I absolutely love working on the layout for the magazine because it's putting all these pieces together and seeing a finished product come from it that other people enjoy, but more importantly, that I enjoy working and looking at. So I think it's of a similar mindset, even if it is just quote unquote just portfolio ebooks that are coming from this. But yeah, I don't know. Well, like I said, we'll see what happens, but that's for another day.
Yeah. And kind of also on that note a little bit before we get to our artist of the week. So I've been creating the unpolished ebooks by combining the journal entries with the looks of the film in the light box and all that sort of stuff. And now I'm working, well, it's mostly done. I just have to write some text for it, but it's the fifth volume. And I was thinking about how at some point, as I have like 20 of these, I can't have them all on my website because it'll get too cluttered. And so I decided I'm just going to keep the two most recent volumes on the website, and then all the other ones are going to they'll be accessible to people at a certain tier on Patreon. So the whole library will still exist there, but a lot of that is just out of a tidiness, just keeping things a bit more clean. But also there's certainly incentive if people are interested in the other ones who go on Patreon. But I did put out an email last week, from the time that we're recording this, saying that the first volume of that series I do have available for free on my own Patreon. I figure it's kind of gone through it's run the course of things. So I'm making it so that if you join my own personal Patreon for free, you can actually download that. So if people are curious about that series, and obviously with the thought that if people enjoy that, maybe they'll join. But just in the context of things being tidy and stuff, and there's been a pretty good response to that. But just one of those things where I'll have one of these from each trip. So we're kind of getting there.
No, yeah, that definitely makes sense to push that off towards, in the way that you're doing it, towards the Patreon. Try to incentivize that a little bit more too. Will help. So
yeah, because it's something different where I think, and also with volume 5 that I'm working on right now, there's some things I talk about in the journal that don't get mentioned at all in the videos. And things are hinted at a little bit, but I didn't even mention them. So there's some other stories there that I didn't think were they didn't feel like they were in the right place in the videos. But I think if people watch the videos and then if they download the ebook, and then they kind of read through that, and then they watch the videos again, you get like a little bit of a different perspective on some of the things. So it's just kind of a fascinating part of the process. I guess it's kind of like if you have a book, there are certain things that just you can't put in a movie. It's just not the right place for it. So things are kind of hinted at, but again, it's something very fulfilling about creating that sort of stuff. But I figure it's time now for our artist of the week. And so this week I do what I normally do. I just look through Instagram till I find some work that really jumps out at me. And this week is Pamela Sherlock. And if you just search for her, you'll see sort of a black and white picture of her wearing glasses. I don't know how to pronounce her username.
I think it's just Anti-Reticus.
There you go. And I won't, I know I wouldn't be able to spell that.
I'll obviously have a link in the show notes, but I believe we figured out it's something to do with religion. I'm not exactly the most religious individual in the world, but she has her master's in theology, so I'm assuming there's some kind of linkage there. But
yes. Yeah, that's our best guess. But her work is absolutely beautiful. And I think it really matches well with some of the topics we're talking about earlier. She has this very dreamlike look to many of the images. And I know in some of them, she had mentioned that some of them were like double exposures or all kinds of other fun techniques that she's using. But in particular, the 3 top images that she has on her Instagram, all blue themed. One of them is a double exposure of some dunes. Another is a tree with looks like some falling snow with some flash to make them really kind of glow like orbs. And then the third one I'm completely fascinated by. It's kind of like this blue field with some linear and then some like kind of pinkish orbs. Very dreamlike, very, very, very cool work, and a much different style than than I'm accustomed to and stuff. So there's some really, really cool work here.
Yeah, I'm particularly fond of that. It's that tree with the glowing orbs, the glowing snowfall. That is very beautifully done. And I clicked on the first one that she has pinned of the sand dunes, the double exposure-esque kind of photograph. And it's a whole carousel of photographs that she had taken while in White Sands National Park. Just abstract photographs that all have a very similar kind of aesthetic, blue tonality to it. Very fascinating to look at.
Yeah, and there's some photos of reflections a bit further down. The best way to describe it is just very, very dreamlike, very impressionistic, and it's a sort of work where average person walking by would not really see the potential necessarily. So it really shows the mark of the artist to be able to see these sort of images as being a possibility within the surrounding landscape. But yeah, absolutely beautiful work. And on many of them, it's just really cool to look at and just try to figure out how she made them.
Yeah. It's the ones that I can see definitely have a dreamy effect. It seems like that's something more recent that she's been delving into. And Pamela, if you are listening, I highly encourage you to continue diving into that, because they are all very nicely executed and definitely, like you said, out of the norm of what you would typically see. I don't know. I always love the more abstract photography, the intentional camera movements, and that kind of work. And a part of me wonders if I enjoy it so much because I struggle with it a lot. But nonetheless, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think it's one of those skills that certainly develops through plenty of experimentation and taking something from, if one particular photo turns out pretty well, you take away something from that and move on to the next, and it builds over time. Whereas the average person looking at it would be like, I would have no clue how to even get started with this. But I would imagine it's just a really interesting process that results in the work. But absolutely fantastic, beautiful work. And these photos would look, beautiful when printed large, framed on a wall. It's something where you look at them and it's just very, very cool to see. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion,
join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.